Here we are. Welcome to the Atheist Experience Live. It's Sunday, January 24th, 2016. I'm Matt Dillahunty. Joining me, the president of the ACA, Jen Peeples.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm all right. Well, I'm all right. I was sick in bed most of the week. But for whatever reason, there are people who, every time I say I'm sick or something's going on, I will hear from somebody saying, this is God punishing you. And it's been absolutely hilarious because last year I traveled more than I have in any 2 years combined. I made every single event, even when I almost lost my hand in Sydney, even when I got bit by a spider. Very little. All my illnesses fell into downtime.
Yeah.
And so, I go and I do all that stuff. I go have a nice 2-week vacation over Christmas break, come back and do a week and a half's worth of work. And then I get sick. I missed one episode of the show. Granted, it was a really special episode of the show because Neil Carey was here in town and I wanted to be here and I couldn't.
Neil Carter.
Anyway, sorry, man. And I wanted to be here, but I'm back. And I'm
back.
still going to get work done. So it's like, it's like the same thing when they said God was trying to punish New Orleans with Katrina and the magical gay shield protected the French Quarter entirely. But,
yes.
So how have you been?
Hey, not too bad. Pretty busy.
Science experimenting?
Yes,
stuff?
yes.
But you had a topic that we've addressed, I don't know how many times.
I know.
And it keeps coming up.
We keep having to address this. It's this idea that theists are stupid or that they are in some way less intelligent than atheists or something. And it's, of course, always the atheists who are patting themselves on the back for being smarter than the average bear while demonstrating that they probably are not. And in this case, it was a couple of guys who showed up in the the Atheist Experience Facebook discussion group, the official discussion group that we have. And one of them had posted a link to a blog, and the guy had referenced some kind of published study that had been done on a correlation of IQ and religious belief. And they had aggregated these results somehow on a national level. And there were so many problems with this. I mean, first of all, the study in question, it was published in a not terribly well-known journal, but it was behind a paywall, so I couldn't grab the study and actually read the original study to find out, for example, what kind of instrument they used to assess IQ, because if they used an instrument that wasn't even valid for that population, then automatically that calls into question the rest of the results. The other thing is, the only measure that I could determine for assessing religiosity was percentage of people who report some kind of religious belief in that population, that's another problematic way of measuring that. So we don't have any idea of assessing really how devout people are or anything, what denomination, because that can make a big difference in how people perform on a specific test, for example. But we also didn't get any information about, did they control for things like poverty? Because that has a huge impact on how well people do on the so-called IQ tests. So there were all kinds of problems with this claim just from the beginning. And again, it was behind a paywall, so I couldn't assess, the quality of the paper or the research, and I wasn't going to pay $35 to read what was probably a crap paper. So anyway,
even if it was accurate, I don't know that this necessarily means much, because we know people. If you took people in a wide spectrum of IQs, not that I give a crap about IQ or it means much of anything, you're going to find people at the upper end who are religious and people at the upper end who aren't, and people at the lower end who are religious and who aren't. The most they could ever say is that perhaps the mean IQ of atheists could perhaps be slightly higher, which doesn't actually tell you anything at all, because you could also make the argument that as IQ increases, we also see a rise in a decrease in empathy or other things that people might say are requirements for getting in tune with religion. So it's just a bad...
Well, and that was actually what they were saying, is that the mean IQ of this population was higher in countries that were less religious. But again, their measures of what counts as less religious was pretty loose.
So we're doing it like on a nation basis,
right?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you're right to go to poverty and other things. There's all kinds of things.
Yeah, there's. I mean, if you tried to do that within the U.S. And you didn't control for things like poverty, for example, even region of the country, you could make a lot of mistakes. Just right off the bat there. And these were all kinds of, things that I came up with, like I said, just not even being able to get to the actual paper. But these are questions that come up when I see stuff like that, because it's kind of an extraordinary claim. And
also, you'd have to look at the history of each of the countries, too. How big was a particular religion at a particular time? Not all these nations have the same history.
Right.
And religion has a different impact and means different things to people. If you were living in a nation that was, constantly in wars over religion, it might be less important to you than a nation like ours that was built on religious liberty, and yet one religion became the predominant one, and God has chosen this country. And if you're brought up kind of enculturated into that sort of society, that changes things. So.
Well, the other thing that some people haven't seemed to consider, the people that are promoting this idea that theists are less intelligent than atheists, it's this idea that extreme religiosity, particularly in poor countries, that extreme religiosity might be a symptom and not the cause of the problem. Because we know that a lot of countries that have strong social safety networks, that tends to mitigate religious belief. And in times when, like, the economy takes a downturn and stuff like that, what we see is that, in fact, I believe the Catholic Church has noted that applications for men trying to get into monasteries increases during economic downturns. And I don't think that's a good measure of, increasing religious belief so much as it is, people are economically disadvantaged and they want to find something to do about that.
I wonder, though, if they were perhaps trying to make a different argument, not that this country, which has been incredibly religious, and this country that hasn't over a long period of time, the IQ has risen over here, that essentially the religion is dumbing the society down. If they're making that kind of argument, there's entirely something could be to that, but we haven't, I don't think, made the case.
Yes, and that could be. It could be that if religion is interfering with people pursuing, say, higher education, or in the case of, like, some of the religious people in the U.S., trying to teach creationism or promoting skepticism of good science.
Yeah, discouraging critical thinking.
That sort of thing, that can probably cost you some points on any kind of standardized test.
But then we also have to look at the problems with the tests.
Exactly. There's always things you can look at with the test. And again, I don't know what instrument they used to assess IQ, whether it was valid for that population or what. But anyway, so once again, we have people claiming that atheists are more intelligent than theists, and that ain't necessarily so.
There's also the curiosity that is us.
Right.
Having once upon a time been theists and now being atheists, I'm pretty sure my IQ didn't go up. As a matter of fact, given what we know about IQ, it has probably gone down, as it tends to decline with age. The big problem, and I've talked about this before, is one of overreaching. Even if it were the case, what can you glean from that? If it turns out, and if what I suspect is true, and there is any correlation at all, then it would be incredibly marginal, like a couple of points, and which would ultimately be insignificant, because we're not talking about 160 IQs versus 70 IQs. It's not like that you have to be incredibly boneheadedly uninformed and almost mentally deficient to accept religion. There are brilliant people who accept religious claims as well. I think there's something else going on other than a matter of intelligence.
Yeah.
But so we got David, the first caller from, is it Grand Blanc, Michigan?
Grand Blanc.
Grand Blanc.
Hi, Matt.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
I'm a proponent of William Lane Craig's moral argument, and I have a couple of questions about some of the objections you've had with that argument in the past.
Okay.
So, as I understand it, you are a moral realist, correct?
What's that?
From what I understand, you are a moral realist, right? You
It would-
accept premise 2 of the argument.
Well, it depends on what. So you better give the argument so that it's clear that, and we're not just talking to each other in code while nobody else gets to hear anything.
Okay, well, premise 1 is if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist.
Yeah, I
Premise
reject the
2
first
is
premise.
objective moral values and duties do exist, and then the conclusion is that God exists.
Yeah, I reject the first premise.
Okay, and from what I understand, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting you, but in the past you've said that moral values are right and wrong depending on how they affect the well-being of people.
So, yeah, when I'm talking about morality, I tend to be talking about well-being. If that's not what somebody else is talking about, then we'd need a different word.
Okay.
But that, to me, seems to be the evaluation that we're making. And that because we're physical beings in a physical universe, there are truths to be discovered about the consequences of our actions. But they are entirely situational.
Okay, well, then my question would be, what is truly wrong with negatively affecting the well-being of people on an atheistic worldview? If we are just a blind product of time plus matter plus chance, what inherent moral worth do we have?
We have moral worth to ourselves. That's what matters.
Is that not completely subjective, though?
Yeah.
So how is it objectively wrong
So-
to hurt somebody?
The assessment is contingent upon us agreeing that we're going to care about well-being.
Okay, well, I agree that well-being is a good thing, and I agree
Okay.
that people have inherent value.
Then
but
that's the only thing we need to agree on to then be able to make non-subjective assessments of actions.
Okay, but on your worldview, if there is no God and we are just overgrown germs, then what is our inherent moral worth? I have a basis.
There's no such thing as inherent moral worth.
So it isn't right or wrong to kill somebody.
Moral evaluations are what we make. There's no intrinsic right or wrong.
So morality is subjective.
The foundation of morality, as I mentioned already and conceded a minute ago, is subjective, that we're going to care about well-being. Because if we don't, we're going to cease to exist. We care about our existence and we care about our well-being. Those people who don't care about it tend to go away. And so what I said a minute ago was that the only thing we need to agree on is that we do in fact care about our well-being. And once we agree to that, which is subjective, and you could potentially argue arbitrary, I don't think it's quite the case, because we're talking about whether or not we exist or not, or the quality of our existence. But assuming we agree on well-being, we can then make non-subjective assessments of the consequences of our actions. If you and I care about well-being, then lopping off my head is in violation with my well-being, right?
Yes.
Okay,
But
that's all we need, and it's not a matter of opinion as to whether or not that is in violation of my well-being. It's a fact.
okay, but you're just redefining right and wrong in terms of
I'm not
Richard
redefining
Force.
anything. What I'm saying is this is what most everyone has always meant when they talk about right and wrong. That what they're actually pointing to is a foundation of well-being. That if morality is to mean anything, it references well-being. Now, if you disagree with that morality is something else, okay, then you're talking about something different from what I'm talking about.
Well, as I said, I agree with you that morality has to do with well-being, and that
Cool. Then no God's required. If
Not
morality is
necessarily.
about well-being, then the first premise of the argument is already wrong.
No, I wasn't conceding that. I was saying that I agree that people matter and that what helps our well-being is generally good, but on an atheistic worldview, how can you make that assertion without that just being your opinion? If
It is
Hitler
just
thinks
my
it's good-
opinion, and it happens to be shared by pretty much everybody who's ever lived anywhere.
But I thought you said morality was objective.
I said, wow, I don't know how many times can I agree with you that the foundation, I've said repeatedly in this episode, the foundation of well-being is subjective. But once we agree on that, the evaluations of actions with respect to that is objective.
Okay, well, maybe it would help if I tell you what I mean by objective. Objective means right and wrong regardless of human opinion.
Okay, that's not what objective means. Objective has nothing to do with right and wrong.
Well, when I say objective moral values...
Okay, fine. I don't give a rat's ass what you... If you're going to try to claim that objective morals only exist if you don't begin with some sort of subjective foundation, then you're talking about something else that I'm not talking about. You're now hung up on this word moral, and you're poisoning the well by saying it must necessarily mean what I think it means. Well, I don't agree.
Well, I'm not trying to redefine anything. I'm just telling you what I mean in the argument. Objective means right and wrong regardless of human opinion. So
yeah, and I agree with that, and that's what I said, that cutting off my head, if we say that well-being is the foundation of right and wrong, cutting off my head is in violation of well-being irrespective of anybody's opinion. That's a fact, right?
Okay, but again, that just brings us to the original point. What is so bad about
the original point is morality based on well-being, or is it based on a God?
Okay, well, we both agree that certain things are truly right and wrong. That things like...
And why do we agree on that?
What's that?
And why do we agree that certain things are right or wrong?
Because we inherently know, we intuitively know that some things really are right and wrong.
No, I don't think we intuitively know right from wrong.
We may intuitively know, but that's not the reason, because your intuitions can be wrong. We agree because we're talking about well-being. We've already agreed on that.
Well, right and wrong is objective, if you ask me, because it's grounded in God's nature.
Okay, I don't care.
Yeah, I think that's...
See, the problem is that doesn't make anything objective. All the objections to secular morality that religions think they solve, they don't solve.
Okay, well, maybe this would help. Okay, Hitler thinks that it's all right to kill 6 million Jews, correct?
Well, so I suppose he thinks it does.
What makes his opinion any worse than your opinion? I'm sure that you think otherwise, but is that not just your opinion?
It is, in fact, my opinion, but if we're going to agree that moralities are rooted in well-being, then Hitler's position is objectively in conflict with well-being, as is God's order to kill the Midianites.
Okay, well, see, you're just redefining right and wrong to be that which helps human well-being.
No. I'm not redefining it to be well-being. I'm saying I'm talking about well-being, and for me, that is a good foundation for morality. If you think that morality is something other than well-being, then I'm not talking about that, and I don't care.
Well, for Hitler, killing the Jews was a good foundation for right and wrong. So what makes his values less valid than yours?
Because they're in conflict with well-being?
But that's just your opinion, isn't it?
And shared by 6 million Jews, I might add.
Yeah, well, what in your view makes it wrong?
Because it is contrary to God's necessarily good.
That's just your opinion.
No, it's not, because if
yes,
there
it is. It's not my opinion. I don't agree with you that it's in conflict with God's view. Therefore, we have a disagreement. How can you show me what God's view is? You can't. You don't have no way to demonstrate it. So it's just your opinion.
Well, okay, if there is a God, and his nature is the foundation for objective moral values and duties by which we...
How do you know that's the case?
What's that?
How do you know that's the case?
I'm not saying that I don't have to show that God exists in order to...
Okay, then I don't have to show anything, because what I'm saying here is you're not solving the problem by saying that this is about my opinion. What you're doing to resolve it or attempt to resolve it is by saying, that's just your opinion. My opinion is that it's all rooted in God, and I don't have to show that God is real or God exists. That's just the way it is.
Well, you can let me finish. On a theistic worldview, God's nature is the paradigm of right and wrong. It's the standard by which we can determine if something is good or evil.
Yeah, and I don't buy that.
What's that?
I don't buy that.
Okay, then you disagree. Well, would you agree that if there was no God, then it would all be subjective?
I don't see how it's not subjective whether there's a God or not.
I'm talking about moral values. Would they be subjective if there was no God?
I'm not. So at the point at which you're saying it's subjective, I am not convinced that it's not subjective, whether a God exists or not. A God does not solve the problem, because at most all you've done is say, this is this God's opinion.
Okay, well, that's not the truth. If
How
God
do you know?
exists, then his moral commands flow from his necessarily good nature.
How do you?
If
That's
How do you know
horseshit.
he's good?
his nature is
How did you-
necessarily
how
good,
did you
that's-
tell that?
he's
that?
the greatest. He's the greatest conceivable being.
How do you know that
Based
they
on
exist?
what?
Okay, I can conceive of beings that are great, but that doesn't mean they exist.
If God exists, then his moral commands are necessarily good. He is the
And if
foundation of the
universe
right
creating pixies exist, then they could have created the universe. That doesn't solve the problem.
Well, okay, let's get back on track to the argument, because you say that moral values are objective.
I
out of one
objected
side
to
of
the very first premise, which you've not gone back
so
to.
the first premise, again, is that if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist.
Right.
How do you ground objective right and wrong if there is no God?
I've said I reject the first premise.
Okay, then, but you said that moral values are objective. You
I've said that you can make moral assessments that are objective, provided you agree on a foundation with which to evaluate them to.
Okay, well, like I said, if something is objectively right or wrong, that means it's right or wrong regardless of human opinion.
Yes.
So,
Cutting off my head is right or wrong regardless of your opinion of it. But it's right or wrong with respect to what? And I'm saying that it's right or wrong with respect to well-being. And you're saying that it's right or wrong with respect to God's nature. And I don't
Okay.
give a rat's ass what God's nature is, because you haven't demonstrated there is a God. And if God's nature was to turn around and say, kill your child or kill the Midianites or anything else, it doesn't make it morally correct. Either something is right or wrong because God says so, or God says so because it's already right or wrong. If the first is true, then whatever God says becomes moral, and there's no moral standing beyond capriciousness, beyond God's opinion, which still makes it subjective. And if God only says something is moral because it's his character to say that things are moral, then his character can be discovered irrespective of whether he exists or says so.
I want to get back to the original thing that you said. You said that it's wrong to lop off your head regardless of human opinion.
Yeah.
Because
That's not the first thing I said, by the way, but go ahead.
well, you said that, and then you went on to talk about how God is deficient for objective moral values, which was off topic of the first premise anyways.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
If the first premise is that without God you can't have objective moral values, what if it turns out you can't have objective moral values even if there is a God? Then the argument utterly fails. I could concede there is a God, and you still have not demonstrated objective moral values under the definition you're trying to use. That's why I reject the first premise.
Okay. Well, I still want to hit on that one point, though, because I don't think you've sufficiently given a foundation for objective moral values.
It's not
if
my
there's no
goal or requirement to give a foundation for objective moral values. Your argument begins with, if there is no God, there is no objective moral values. You have not demonstrated that there actually are objective moral values under your definition.
Okay, well, I just need to show that premise one is true. So
Sure.
if there's, on an atheistic worldview, what makes anything right or wrong? It's all just opinion based.
Okay, you're not understanding the first premise.
If there is no God, in other words, if atheism is true, then nothing is objectively right or wrong. That's the first premise.
So, there's two things that need to happen here. You have to demonstrate that on your worldview, objective moral values can exist, and on all competing worldviews, they cannot exist. Now, my view is that depending, if we agree on a definition of well-being, if that's going to be the foundation of morality, then objective assessments can be made about actions. But that objective values, as if they are intrinsic objective truths, don't exist. So if a God exists, you have to be able to demonstrate that objective moral truths do exist. And my position is that I don't see that they exist under your definition, whether there's a God or not.
Well, on my definition, if there is a God, then we have a standard of right and wrong.
How?
So you can think about it like,
How? I mean, that's nothing more than a bald
I
assertion.
wish you would let me finish because I was going to get to that.
Okay.
So imagine we're all floating around in outer space. I have my own up and down. It's relative to my position in space. If you're floating around somewhere else, you might have your own definition of up and down. Who's to say what's up or down in outer space? You can't, because you don't have a spatial reference point.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Likewise, if there is no God, you don't have a moral reference point. You can't say whether something
Yes,
is
we
right
do.
or
Yes,
wrong.
we still
have a moral reference point.
Yeah.
It's well-being, which you agreed to.
Okay, well, I actually didn't agree to that. I said that most
So you don't think that's a reference point?
So you don't think that's a good reference point for morality?
No, because human
Okay.
well-being is not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing if there is no God. If it's just
So,
Wait,
so,
wait a
so
minute.
your
Why
objection...
is
ahead.
my well-being contingent on the existence of a God?
because if we're created in His image with inherent worth, then you have intrinsic
I don't
well-being.
believe that.
So you've just got this cavalcade of assumptions. You're just going to assume that God exists, that we're created in His image, that He's necessarily good, that this serves as a moral foundation. Those are all just bald assertions. Please demonstrate that any of it is true.
Well, I don't have to demonstrate
Then you don't
that
have to
it's
stay
true.
on the
That's what
show.
argument-
Thanks, we're going to move on.
Could you please?
Yeah.
Nope. We'll go ahead and get Johanan and La Miranda queued up there. Yeah, you can say, here's the problem, is that theistic objections to secular morality aren't solved by theism. Oh, well, without God, you have no foundation. Okay, well, with God, we have no foundation, because all you've done is say, this is what God says, or this is consistent with God's character. Well, I don't care whether or not my action is consistent with what God wants me to do, or what God says to do, or God's character. I care about whether or not it is in the best interest of human beings, whether or not it is within our well-being. There's no guarantee that a God has our best interests at heart. At all. And so if a God can say, run around and slaughter these people, or kill your child, or anything else, how did you determine that God is the good one and Satan is the evil one? If they're both capable of deceiving you, then perhaps what they're saying, I am the law and I am the ultimate arbiter of morality, is wrong. Oh, but God can't be wrong. Why not? Because we assume God can't be wrong. Well, congratulations. Your argument is entirely circular. What you have said is God equals morality, which means anything that God commands or anything you think God commands suddenly becomes moral, with no evaluation of its real consequences, with no tie to the well-being of the participants involved. Theistic morality is an epic failure, and it is used to get people to commit atrocities in the name of their God with no consideration of humanism, humanity, or what should be the right thing. Now, if you don't agree with me that well-being is a good foundation for morality, that's your prerogative, and the best I can do is try to convince you through debate and discussion. But religion has the same problem. This is what my God says. This is what my God says. Well, how do you resolve that conflict? You can't, beyond coercion, conversion, or conquest. Sitting around arguing about whose God is right doesn't get you anywhere. But we can sit around and discuss what is or isn't in our best interest. And that's how we make progress. And that's why humanism is infinitely more valuable than any religious dogma pertaining to morality.
Which, incidentally, if that's your claim, that basically if you think God said to do something, that it's morally correct for you to do it, by that logic, we couldn't convict Andrea Yates of anything, because she actually believed her religion told her she was doing the best thing she could do for her children by killing them before they had a chance to sin and possibly go to hell. So by killing them, she was sacrificing herself, but making sure her children got to heaven. That was
I have an alarm going off. I don't know what it's for. Why would there be an alarm at 5 o'clock on a Sunday?
yeah. So anyway, by killing them, she was basically making sure they went to heaven. So that was her thing. She thought she was doing a good thing. Of course, we recognized that she was very seriously mentally ill, but she still got prosecuted. No one bought the "God told me to" defense.
See, I always silence my cell phone before I come in, but alarms tend to ignore the silence. Damn it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've got, is it Johanan?
Johanan.
In California. How you doing?
Hi. I was going to comment on, you guys have seen many theistic arguments, I'm sure, but have you taken into consideration idealism?
Well, I considered all kinds of things, but you'll have to go into detail on what you mean.
Two basic arguments for this. Actually, I was invited out to California by J.P. Moreland because he was so excited about this. But the first is a philosophic argument. The second is a very simple philosophic argument. The second one is from physics. And the philosophic one pretty much stems from philosophy of mind, and I'm fairly certain both of you will agree with the first premise, which is that substance dualism is false due to the interaction problem, right?
So I don't go so far as to assert that substance dualism is false. I just do not believe that it's true. Hopefully you'll get that distinction.
The second one is that you look at the arguments from philosophy of mind, and they're pretty strong. I mean, there's numerous ones you can do. There's Kripke's argument, Mary the color scientist, pointing is EAN. Yep. You can use Cartesian skepticism to arrive at another one, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of good cases to be made that the mind is immaterial. And then when you look on the other side of it, a lot of the materialist models of the mind really don't make much sense. Like eliminativism tries to get rid of consciousness entirely. Functionalism says the mind is a process, which is kind of strange because you're talking about your own subject being an action rather than a thing.
Well, now the fact that we don't necessarily use language properly to describe it is not a defeater for the position. The fact when we're just getting to where we understand the mind, of course we're going to refer to ourself and we're going to say things like my mind, my brain. Don't let the language, inhibit our ability to understand what's actually going on. I view the mind as a function of the brain.
I know. Well, the thing with that is that it's not just about the language. The language reflects our original experience, and so the first thing you know in the world is your own mind exists.
It reflects our perception, but that doesn't mean our perception is accurate or our ability to describe it is accurate.
Right, but there has to be, at some level, a very basic level of perception which has to be accurate, otherwise, which then forms the foundation of all of our subsequent knowledge. Like, Cartesian skepticism, right? Descartes doubts everything he can in the world, and then reaches this fundamental foundation, then everything else derives from that. And well, in that particular case, fundamental foundation.
So I don't see that there's a bridge for that. There's just basically a presupposition that's a kind of a pragmatic.
You have to. I mean, you can't really ground knowledge. I mean, even you say it is a presupposition, right?
Yeah.
You still have to have something like that to ground any sort of knowledge, which should even include scientific.
The ground is the presupposition, but how does this get us to an argument for deism or theism?
Okay, so the mind is immaterial. Dualism is false.
I'm not saying the mind is immaterial. I'm not sure that the mind is something that actually.
I'm giving the argument. Okay, I know you don't believe that.
Okay.
We'll get to that later.
So and I'll let you finish, but I mean, it's just another one of those examples where we're going to begin an argument with a premise that I reject.
Well, you already accept one premise, and we'll get to so the whole argument hinges on the second premise.
No. No argument hinges on the second premise. If it's got two premises and you reject the first one, the argument's dead.
No, you accept the first one. The first one was that dualism is false.
No, actually, he said it's not true.
You believe it was false. You don't believe it, though.
I don't accept that dualism is true, but go ahead.
Okay, so we're both honest, and the second then premise is that the mind is immaterial. Now,
okay, I reject that premise.
You reject that premise, but everything hinges on that one premise. Now, if that premise is true, though, then the only substance in existence is mind. So therefore, if mind is immaterial, it therefore follows automatically that idealism is also true, right?
So if somebody comes up to you with an argument and you reject one of the premises, why would you bother continuing?
Well, we could further discuss the premise you reject. Now, I was going to bring a second argument in, very briefly, that would kind of go into put another take on all this, which I think would really change the perception of things, okay? In the field of quantum gravity right now, my background was physics, and so I'm familiar with this. In the field of quantum gravity, right now, researchers are discovering that what we refer to as space-time is emergent. Now, space-time is the ground of physical reality. When you talk about something being physical, you're talking about matter or energy existing in space-time. Am I right?
I suppose so.
Okay. Now, if space, which is what everyone
Are you
saying.
mud wrestling a walrus or something in there? Because I can't hear you. The microphone's going all over the place.
Sorry, is it better?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. Just a couple quotes on this. This was Einstein didn't know how to develop the theory at the time, but he knew where the theory lay.
So you're failing miserably. I don't care about quotes. Like,
All right.
just what is the point? Can we get to the point?
Yeah.
Bottom line is, we're saying that physical reality is emergent, which means that whatever it emerges from is necessarily non-physical, and in particular, we can now quantify it. And what it is it's actually Sean Carroll wrote a blog on this recently. What it emerges from is entangled quantum information. Now, when you go over to cognitive science, this is from my home state in Wisconsin, there's a researcher called Dillahunty, and he has the world's most popular cognitive science model currently, called integrated information theory. Now, in Conscious as Integrated Information, a provisional manifesto, in footnote 14, he states that quantum entanglement and integrated information, to the extent that one cannot perturb two elements independently, they are informationally one. So what he's saying here is that entangled states are integrated information states, which are conscious states. But now, given the physics, which is coming on consensus at this point, space-time emerges from entangled information. So it therefore follows that space-time emerges from integrated information, which means space-time emerges from the conscious state. So you have physical reality, physical space-time, everything inside of it, emerging from a deeper non-physical reality, and that non-physical reality is consciousness. Now, when I sent this to Sean Carroll, interestingly enough, he didn't actually have a good response. It said, I don't understand IT well enough to say, but entanglement is ubiquitous in many physical systems.
Wait, so you sent this all to Sean Carroll, and he replied?
Yeah, he replied. It was fascinating because he didn't know what to say. He was, he's not a cognitive scientist, obviously, but given the cognitive science, Tononi is one of the world's foremost cognitive science researchers. It would automatically follow from Carroll's physics that space-time emerges from a conscious state.
I guess good luck with that, and let us know when you publish something in a peer-reviewed journal that
I'll give you some
documents that.
I'll give you some peer-reviewed journals.
I don't want them.
What? What?
I don't want them.
But you said you're curious about this, right?
No, I'm actually bored beyond belief, but you can email us if you want to.
This is, you guys are the Atheist Experience. You guys call for theists to come in and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to give you experimental evidence.
What could your argument? How could your argument in any way prove there's a God?
Well, if the universe is contained within a mind.
If the universe is contained within a mind, if we could conclude that, which I don't for a second think that we can or think you've done, but then the conclusion would be that the universe is contained in a mind. How does that get you to a God?
Okay, well, it's pretty simple. A God is defined as an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent being. Right?
Okay, that's the God of classical theism. It's not required for any and every God. But your argument doesn't get you to omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. It just gets you to a mind.
I'll explain how. If everything is contained within the mind, right, a mind, it therefore follows that that mind knows everything in the universe.
No, it
right?
doesn't.
No.
There are things contained within my mind that I don't have immediate recall of or understanding of and cannot manipulate.
It's not in your subconscious mind, in your conscious mind.
Well, how does your argument get us to conscious mind anyway? It just got us to mind, didn't it?
Time is being literally simulated within this mind. Okay, these are
but that doesn't get us to conscious mind. That gets us to mind. This is the problem with people who begin with a conclusion and try to make their discoveries within data fit that. So you come up with a model that says, oh, well, physical properties, let me finish, physical properties are emergent, and they must be emerging from something, so we're going to call that a mind when I haven't seen any evidence that it is in fact a mind. What you've done is taken one definition of information, quantum information and somehow equated that with a mind. But now when it gets down to saying, how does this get us to a God? You say that not only is this mind, but it's necessarily conscious mind that is manipulating it, which would give it all the qualities that we would necessarily associate with a God, which doesn't tell you anything about any God anybody has ever believed in, or whether you haven't. You're doing the same thing Craig does when he talks about first causes, gets to the universe must have a cause, and therefore it's Jesus. You're making an incredible leap.
I didn't say Jesus. I just said a God.
Yeah,
Sorry, what?
Yeah, he didn't say Jesus. He just said a God. But
No, I didn't say you
matter.
said. Can you not freaking listen to me? I didn't say you said Jesus. Craig said Jesus. You're making a similar leap from information to conscious mind that I'm going to call God. And Craig is making a leap from must have been a first cause to Jesus.
Matt, remember I said before, this was Tononi from, he's describing conscious states, not like unconscious states. This is actually he has like a whole theory called integrated information theory as a way of mathematically describing these conscious states.
Yeah, how do you demonstrate that it's actually true? Because I'm not interested in mathematical models.
I'll demonstrate that too. If this would follow, consciousness would be in entanglement, right?
I don't know that follows at all.
They have experiments on this, okay? You there?
Yes, we're here.
If you have, they've done experiments on this, and they found that there's something in the brain called gamma synchrony, where there are proteins in the back and front of the brain, and they oscillate in vibration with one another, okay?
Sure. Did you find proteins in the quantum information?
Now, hold on.
Did you find proteins in the quantum information?
Yes, we did. That's what.
Really, there are proteins in the quantum information?
The proteins are held in a state of quantum information.
Okay.
When this gamma synchrony is disrupted in the brain, it turns consciousness off.
So I didn't think that proteins. I mean, I figured proteins are basically biological constructs. I didn't see how a protein could be a part of this.
It's quantum biology. They find
quantum biology.
Quantum biology.
Yeah. It's anyway. Hammeroff had a discussion at a Beyond Belief conference, and he brought this up. And turns out that this is actually how anesthesia works: is they will introduce chemicals into the brain, and it will disrupt the gamma synchrony in the brain. All of their brain functions are working. So whatever the consciousness is, it's not located in the other brain functions. It's just the gamma synchrony shut off. So when they disrupt the gamma synchrony, which is a quantum biological effect, it's an entanglement of proteins on opposite sides of the brain.
So let me cut to the chase here. Let's say that you're right about all this, and that there is a mind that serves as the foundation for all of reality.
Okay.
And that this mind is sufficiently godlike to call God.
Okay.
What difference does that make to any of us?
Well, and this goes, if you want to open this can of worms up, I suppose we can go here. You can start to derive theology, and this is actually a very fascinating topic because it gets into comparative theology as well, comparative religion.
Now, is there some mechanism by which this God manifests in reality in ways that we can understand and detect?
Well, I gave you. It's the quantum experiments.
Okay. I don't care.
Okay. Well, so let's suppose we could say you're looking for something like a miracle, right?
I'm looking for anything, any manifestation of a God that could be detected in reality, because even if I begin to concede the things that you were putting into your argument, that doesn't get us anywhere to a being that we can in fact interact with or know anything about. So now I'm looking for what is the mechanism by which the God mind managed to communicate intentions and ideals to us.
Well, you want to give a personal story? How I got out to Biola? I mean, is that what are you exactly looking for when you say that?
I'm looking for an example. How do you know what this God thinks or wants?
Well, beyond the argument, it could just be panentheism. It could be a deistic deity, right?
Right. And panentheism is a useless proposition about a God.
Well, no, because it gives you an accurate way of modeling the world.
No, it doesn't.
Based on what?
Based on ADS mirror correspondence and IID.
If there's so we have to get to this issue of whether or not there is a being, a thinking agent that wants something and how we can know what it wants. Otherwise, its existence is irrelevant to us.
All right. Well, going to how you can commune with it, so to speak.
Okay.
It's a study from 2012 on quantum cognition, and they found that your inner space, if you go your thoughts and emotions, right? Your inner space is actually modeled best by wave functions. And they had another paper in Popular Science where they're talking about how you can model cognition as a quantum field across the brain, which would be the wave function pre-collapse, which is how you model entanglement. Now, it doesn't work to actually just model it like this. If it is modeled like this, it has to actually behave like this due to things like the Feynman universal simulator problem. I won't go into that now because it's too technical. But the point is this models your inner space. And now, if you
I saw that
here,
movie.
Yeah.
What?
I saw that movie with Dennis Quaid, Inner Space.
Right. All right. So now, here's a cool thought experiment. You can do this right now as you're sitting there. This
Cool.
Something kind of intuit what I'm talking about. Okay. When you think of an idea, What are you thinking of right now? Some object, maybe. Or think of some thought.
I'm not going to tell you because if you can communicate with God, He can tell you, and then we'd have a really good experiment. But I'm thinking of an idea.
Think of a red hammer. Okay.
Got it. Red hammer.
Now, if I were to open your brain up, I would not be able to find a red hammer floating anywhere. Furthermore,
Well, I hope not.
where is the idea of a red hammer, or maybe more appropriate, where is the form of the number 2? It wouldn't make sense to say you point somewhere in space and say, there's the number 2. You'd be like, there's this, you open your brain up, there's neural tissue in there, but you wouldn't say that there's the actual number 2 itself there.
Yes, it's nothing but a brain pattern. Go on.
Okay, my point is you can't locate the number 2 in space-time.
So what?
That's the same beneath space-time as they're talking about in emergent space-time. You're actually interacting beneath space-time.
No, it's a brain state.
Yes, the brain state is an entangled information state in the gamma synchrony in the
brain. Sure. How does that get you to what a God thinks?
Because that means that you can, in theory, listen closely and hear things from God.
Okay, hang up on this jackass.
Wow.
My apologies.
Yes.
So there's some interesting things in there, and who knows, maybe we'll get a hold of Sean Carroll and see what he says about all of this. But what I get there from all of that is there's a whole bunch of stuff we don't know, and there are interesting discoveries being made. And what people tend to do is try to find a way to make these new discoveries fit what they already believe. And so here's the thing. The book I'm working on is called If I Were God. And I talk about some of these things in there. If I were God, how would I go about communicating with people if I chose to do so? Let me tell you, if I was a God who chose to communicate with people by having them sit around and be contemplative and get impressions of what I might think, I'm a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
Because there's no way for them to verify or to distinguish between here's an idea that I think came from a God and here's an idea that actually comes from a God. That sort of independent verification is why we make use of the scientific method, why my results when I'm done with them and when I publish them are there for somebody else to verify. And what we know from the world's religions is that all of these people who are claiming to get messages from God, they simply don't agree. Oh, they'll agree on little bits and pieces, but they don't agree uniformly. There's no reliable mechanism to say, hey, these people are all getting a message. If we tested prayer, for example, or meditation, and one group of people, let's say Pentecostals of this particular segment of churches in Louisiana, all consistently got the same information, now we would have something to begin investigating, not to draw a conclusion, but to begin investigating. We don't have that. And yet people are willing to draw conclusions. Well, it must be a mind, it must be a conscious mind, it must be a godlike conscious mind, and it communicates us through thoughts and impressions when we're meditating or sitting around relaxing. Okay. I understand why it's appealing, but I don't understand why anybody thinks it's actually true.
Yeah. Well, and there are obvious problems with putting yourself in a highly suggestible state and then thinking that a God is communicating with you.
We hear from the DMT people all the time.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
take drugs and discover the real supernatural world. Well, how do you know it's real?
Yes.
It's like they have no idea how to properly set up test protocols. I mean, before we started, we were specifically talking about a science experiment that her son is doing and the test protocols and why he had to do it again just in case he made a mistake. And it turns out that he had, which is awesome because now not only did he learn how to do the tests, he learned how to check about doing the tests.
Yeah.
And it's just, I get that there's an appeal to this, but when we're just running down, well, it could be this, it could be this.
And this idea about, like we were talking about, controlling as many variables in the test as you can so that you are only testing the thing that you're interested in and not getting, other results based on some confounding factors. If a 10-year-old kid can learn how to do this, you guys can learn how to do this too. Come on.
If there is a red hammer concept, and actually I would say that there are probably a number of brain states within my brain that are consistent with me thinking about a red hammer, because there's a number of different red hammers I could think of. I could think of a claw hammer or a rubber mallet type hammer or any number of things, and they would still be red. But that doesn't mean that there's a concept that's encapsulated in my brain, which was the thing he was getting to. It's not like you could open my brain and find it. You might, though, be able to map my brain states over a long period of time, because those things change too, and with a number of different inputs, and determine when I am thinking about something that is consistent with a red hammer, which means it's physical.
Yeah.
If there's a claim that there's something else manipulating this, or that it exists as something else, we're almost back to the substance dualism that we rejected in the first premise. I don't know the secrets of the universe with regard to quantum mechanics or quantum fluctuations or quantum information or what arises from what, and I don't think anybody else does either. This is a fledgling area, and you were right to probably contact someone like Sean Carroll. Your mistake was in contacting somebody like me, because I don't have the relevant expertise to rebut the points. All I can do is keep asking questions about how does A and B get us to C. And when you start saying that, well, think about this, you can tune in to God in your mind if in fact there's a quantum mind out there. You don't get to tell me what the mechanism is and have it be conditional on an if, because now you're just in the realm of confirmation bias. Oh, I think there might be a God. Let me see if I can tune into him. Yes, I got a message that I'm pretty sure is from God, therefore there's a God. None of that gets you to that. How do you write off delusion?
Yeah, it's like, okay, I'm not a physicist and I'm not a cognitive scientist or anything, but when you tell me that if you sit down and, I guess, contemplate yourself or whatever, you can hear what God's telling you, I know all I need to know.
Yep. Let's see if we can take Hamish from Perth, Scotland. What the hell's that?
Yeah, there is a Perth, Scotland.
I'll be damned.
Apparently the royals hang out there a lot. And my computer just went away here. Come on,
Well,
guys.
that's terrible. Luckily, I've still got my list up.
Yeah.
As a reminder, after the show's over, we get together and go to dinner at, where are we going? Threadgills on?
Yeah, Threadgills, north.
Cool. They'll probably put the address up here in a second now that I've actually mentioned it. Hamish, you there?
Hello.
Hello.
Matthew. I'm here.
All right.
So what do you have for us?
I called in to discuss morality and the mind of God.
Morality and what?
The mind of God.
Okay.
I am a Christian. So, first, I would like to ask you what you are to be morality, because I believe it would be useful for us to agree on our terms.
I think we already had this discussion
Yeah,
earlier.
did you not hear the whole first 30 minutes of the show where we discussed the moral argument and I talked about how well-being was what I used as the foundation for morality?
And how I did not see that part, I'm sorry. But I will say, how do you define well-being?
So it's not well-defined because it's a rather robust concept, and it includes physical well-being and mental well-being and societal well-being. It's one of those things that you're constantly refining the definition of as you go along. And so you begin with simple things like life is generally preferable to death. Continuing living is generally preferable under well-being than dying would be. You can look at it as extinction being less preferable to thriving.
Therefore, would you conclude that it is merely based on human preference?
On human what?
Preference.
It is partially based on preference in the sense that we would like to continue living, that there's ultimately a subjective, I care about well-being. There's nothing you can say to make somebody care about well-being. It's not that well-being is necessarily an intrinsic good that is going to be universally identified. But among those people who would agree with a foundation of well-being, you can then begin to make non-subjective assessments about the consequences of actions.
Why does consensus matter to morality?
Did I say consensus?
Well, you said people should agree on well-being being
Sure.
the center of morality.
Among the people who agree on well-being, well, if you don't have agreement on what you're talking about, then you can't talk about it. So, but generally speaking, well-being in some form or another has been what people have talked about with respect to morality for our entire history.
That is not true, because
It's
people
not?
talk about morality with regards to obeying the Ten Commandments and the Bible.
Sure, there are alternate things that people have pointed to as a foundation of morality, gods and stuff. But what we're really talking about, most of the time we talk about right and wrong, is what is in our best interest. And even when you look at the Ten Commandments, the reason those things were offered is because those people were convinced that that is what was in our best interest. It was in our best interest to obey God, to not have idols, to honor thy father and mother, to not steal, to not lie, etc. Ultimately, that comes down to what's in our best interest.
In any case, I would like to put forward that God's decision is ultimately the most effectful on our well-being. Hello?
What was that?
God is ultimately the greatest effector of our well-being.
What God?
The God of the Bible, the Lord.
Okay, so is the Bible an accurate portrayal of his character?
Absolutely.
So when he told people to slaughter the Midianites and everybody else, that was moral?
Indeed it was.
And when he said you could own slaves provided they didn't die within a couple days of beating them, that was moral?
That was specifically directed for the time, for the Jews. And
So
yes,
morality
that was
depends on the time? So something could be moral at one time and not moral at another time?
Yes.
That's
for
moral
example-
relativism, isn't it?
For
It is.
example,
So are you saying, so morality, I'm assuming to you, is what is consistent with God's character? Right?
allow me to just answer your first question first. So you said morality is relative under what I have proposed. And that is true because, for example, it might be wrong to kill someone in one context and then not wrong in another context.
Okay, so I understand. For example, in self-defense, we might not consider it wrong to kill somebody in the same way that we would consider it wrong to just run up and kill someone just because you feel like it. But
Yes.
you're talking about God as the foundation of morality. So when God says that it's okay to have slaves, you say that's moral. So that would mean that it's okay to have slaves, right?
If God said so, then yes.
Okay, so it's okay for us to have slaves.
That was back in the day.
No. When does God come out against slavery?
He need to.
He doesn't need to?
Well,
So we've got a book that you're saying represents God's character, and in that book, God permits the owning of slaves, and never condemns it. So,
For example,
so the last word we have from your God is that slavery is okay, right?
the Lord cannot command us in the Bible to have laws regarding, for example, technology. Like,
Well, I don't know why you're changing the subject. This is a simple question. In the Bible, in the Bible, God sanctions slavery and never condemns it. So is slavery moral or immoral?
It really depends.
It depends on what? You're
The exact context and situation.
No. God says you can have slaves, right? He didn't say you can have slaves in this particular context or situation. He said you can have slaves.
He told the ancient Hebrews that they could have slaves.
Okay. Did he ever tell anybody that they couldn't?
Did he ever tell anybody else that they could?
Oh, okay.
Oh,
So God said it's okay for Hebrews to own people as property. And you think that that's okay?
Chosen people.
What?
Yes.
Okay, then you're an immoral. Then you're immoral as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's your opinion.
Yep, it is.
Very well.
Sorry?
Just like to put forth.
Sorry, what?
Very well.
I can't hear you.
But I apologize, Matt.
You apologize for what? For being immoral?
No, for not being audible.
Oh,
Okay.
not being audible. Yeah.
You ought to apologize for not being moral.
Yeah.
Well, I am being moral from my perspective.
Okay, and your perspective is in conflict with mine, and it's in conflict with well-being and what we would consider decent. It's in conflict with what the United Nations has to say about basic human rights. It's in conflict with pretty much everything any decent person thinks about basic human rights, and that is that slavery should never have been considered moral.
Although
Neither
it's
you
consistent with ISIS. They
nor-
think slavery's good.
What's that?
Neither you nor the United Nations nor any other human organization on earth has the moral power to decree something wrong.
Okay,
Of course.
so why do you?
I do not. However, the Lord does.
Okay, prove it. Because all I have is your opinion about what God says and that He's the Lord and that He can do this. I don't have any information from this God or Lord.
Well, if you read the Bible...
I've read it,
Yeah.
I've taught it, I've debunked it, I've moved on. Why should I care what the Bible has to say?
Why interrupt me?
Why should I care what the Bible has to say?
I was just getting to that and you interrupted me.
Okay, there's a reason why I did that, and that's because you're making irrelevant arguments. Why do I care what the Bible has to say?
Because if the Bible is true, then what the God commands is in our best interest.
Not necessarily. First of all, you haven't demonstrated that the Bible is true. I asked why I should pay attention to it, and you can't begin that with an if. But also, there's no demonstration that it's in our best interest. According to the Bible, everything's happening according to God's plan. We are unworthy. We may or may not be gifted with salvation, but we are not the foundation upon which morality rests or God's goals rest.
And indeed we are.
Okay.
Really?
In any
The
case,
Lord
you haven't
commands
demonstrated
us-
that it's true.
The Lord commands us to obey Him.
Yeah.
His
Who
word.
cares?
Why is that in our best interest to obey? Is it so that we don't
Because
fall
then
under His
we'll
wrath?
Go to heaven.
So that we don't fall
Yes.
under His wrath,
Absolutely.
right?
Indeed.
Yeah. So you're saying that the God of the universe cares about us, and we better pay attention, otherwise we'll fall under His wrath.
Absolutely.
Yeah, He's an asshole who's immoral. If He exists, and yet you still haven't bothered to demonstrate that He exists or that I should care about His book. He is the mafia boss who's coming around telling us that, hey, that's a really nice soul you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. Why don't you pay up your vig?
The Lord's nature is such that He derives pleasure from our suffering, our just suffering, sufficient enough to outweigh that suffering.
And you think that that represents a good moral character?
It maximizes well-being.
I don't see how.
Really?
How does sending me to hell maximize well-being?
Because he gains glory greater than your suffering.
Are you sure you're not worshiping Cthulhu?
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Yeah, I don't believe you're for real. I don't believe your entire shtick or the way you're talking or the way you're arguing or anything. So we're just going to move on and call it an end to this call. Thanks. All right.
Yeah.
Do we want to take one more?
Yeah. Let's.
There's a Stephen, an atheist in Knoxville, Tennessee. We'll get him queued up there, and that'll probably be the last one of the day because I'm clearly pushing it between morality, quantum physics, morality, and a head cold.
Yeah.
God gets pleasure from our suffering.
And maximizes his glory.
Yeah. I don't give a shit about maximizing his glory. And you don't get to claim that it's all about us while arguing that we exist to maximize his glory. That's a demonstration that your position is defunct. Anyway, Stephen, thanks for waiting.
Hey, thanks. How you guys doing?
All right.
Been a fan of the show for a long time. I enjoy watching it. My 16-year-old son and I really enjoy watching it.
Okay, so what's your question?
He's going to be one of us. My mother is 83 years old. I was raised in a Southern Baptist church. Matt, I think you'd appreciate that right there.
Yeah.
Should I really come out to her or sort of stay in the shadows and not do that? I really don't want to upset her at the tail end of her life, but I don't want to be disingenuous to being an atheist. So what would you think I should do?
So, I guess, what's the benefit of coming out to her at this point?
Nothing. I have tons of friends that know her and know me, and I just don't want somebody to drop the bombshell on her.
Okay.
So should I really do it or not do it? What do you think? I don't think I should.
Well, I mean, you're not under any obligation to come out to your mother or anybody else unless you want to. And the thing we always tell people is that whatever you decide to do, make sure you can live with the consequences. So if it's going to do something to damage your relationship with her, then I'd say, weigh that carefully. If you have a good relationship with her and you want to keep that, maybe this is not something, that you need to talk about. I mean, how often does this issue of religion come up between you two?
It doesn't come up between us that much at all, but it comes up between friends that I went to high school with because they still live there. And what I hear from them is they will say to me, what would your mother think if she knew you was an atheist? And that's really not a good thing to say to somebody. No,
it sounds like you might need to change your relationship with some of your friends.
You're probably right about that.
Yeah, I think, I tend to look at it. My first question was going to be exactly the same thing that Jen asked, which is, what's the upside to this? Now, everybody in my family knows now, including my grandmother, who's 89, I think. My other grandmother knew, but she has since died. And my relationship with my grandmother is still pretty good. My relationship with my folks took a hit for a while, but got better. It was pretty much, it was terrible for a little while. And then I made the point of saying, hey, look, you know me, and I'm a decent person. You believe that God has a plan. You know that if God reveals himself to me, I'm not going to pretend like it didn't happen. And you also know that you're not going to change my mind by just preaching at me. So the best thing you can do is put it in God's hands. Pray that God will reveal himself to me, that's a part of his plan.
I'm pretty sure that my mother knows I'm an atheist. We kind of not really talked about it, but sort of glossed over it, like most Southern Baptists do. You sort of say, well, God bless him.
Yeah, Southern Baptists pretend not to recognize each other in the liquor store.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it's probably there, but I really would like to, it's kind of selfish on my part to really want to do it, and maybe I shouldn't. So
no, it is selfish on your part, and that doesn't necessarily make it wrong. I understand the desire to be honest about who you are with the people that you love. Mm-hmm. It makes sense, and it would be very nice. I know that my parents aren't going to die with a gross misunderstanding of who I am. They're going to die with a little bit of a misunderstanding of who I am because we don't have those conversations anymore to clarify it. So, they're in this he's working for Satan kind of mode, but somehow they reconcile it. If you're doing it, I think if you're doing it just for yourself, I do see some potential upsides to that. There's also the possibility that, you know, depending on how the conversation goes, you might find that your mom is not as distraught by this as you might think, or that she might have had her own doubts that she entertained. But, you know, when we talk to people who are, you know, nearing the end of life, and hopefully she's got, you know, another 20 years or whatever. I've had relatives make it over 100.
I hope so.
But, you know, when we're talking at that upper end, as long as your intentions are pure and you are trying to have a decent relationship with your mother, I think you'll end up making probably the right decision, or at least handling it softly. I mean, I don't talk to my mom about religion the same way I talk to other people. I've done that exactly one time in an email, and it did not even have the response. I thought I was going to end my relationship with my mom, but instead I got a very different email in reply. But people think, oh, Matt does this all the time. He does debates, he does lectures, he does the Atheist Debates video stuff, he does a TV show. So his life is just consumed with this. I just did a 2-week vacation where religion almost never came up. Maybe two, 3 conversations over a couple weeks. And, you know, we have 5 other things that we care about. We build our relationships on the areas where we agree.
Oh, the past couple of years, my mother, I was raised in the Southern Baptist Church here in Coker, Alabama, of all strange places to be raised. And I do what I can. I would like to not upset her, but however, I still want to be true to myself and true to the relationship and the love I have for my mother, and still not sugarcoat what I could or could not be. And that's the thing. I guess it really doesn't matter. When you think about it, at the end of the day, if I believe there is no God, and I kind of think I'm agnostic, not completely atheist, but agnostic, because I have no clue if there is or not. I believe there's not, but there could be. What difference does it make?
Then you're an atheist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is I'd say is the one recommendation that I give to people, apart from what Jen already said, is don't make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
Don't do the we need to have a sit down type thing. That tends to make it more ominous than it needs to be.
Correct.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, if you're having normal conversations about, like Matt was saying, there's got to be tons of things you agree on that you know, interact about all the time. And if in the course of that, she gets the idea that you're an atheist, oh well, you know, if she wants to know, she'll ask.
It's almost like coming out to being gay. I mean,
Yeah,
the couch
it is.
looks great. The back porch is good. By the way, I hate Jesus. The part, you know, from a mother's standpoint, that's what she's going to hear.
yeah,
Yep.
it is, and I think that's why, you know, in the conversations that I tell people that I've had, I make sure that I dispel the common mishearings that people are going to get, because what we hear a lot is, you know, what made you so mad at God? Well, I'm no more mad at God than I am at Lord Voldemort.
Yes,
You know.
of course.
You know, he's a terrible character. But it wasn't about being mad. It was about not being convinced that this is actually true, and being
100%
more
behind
convinced
you.
that these are the
I'm
types of
100%
fictions that we make up.
I'm sorry, I'm 100% behind you on that. My son and I, in 16, we talk about the lack of proof there is a God. It's fine. There could actually be a God, but neither of us have seen the kind of proof that would give us the amount of passion to go into that environment and just stay there. It's really weird.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I wish you luck, and you know, depending on what you decide, you might call us back sometime, let us know how it goes or what you decided to do. But
Well, thanks, Matt.
we're gonna call it a show here, since I'm starting to get sweaty again.
All right.
Don't want to get everybody else sick.
Yeah. I mean, I got
Anyway,
stuff to
thanks
do
everybody
this
for
week.
tuning in. Thanks for the studio audience for hanging out today, and everybody working
Yeah.
behind the scenes. We are still working on the phone solution. We thought we were going to be up and running today,
Yeah.
but it turns out we ordered kind of a wrong part thing, which we sent back.
Yeah.
We do, though, have the security stuff up at the building, and everything's going well. And we'll get we should be having telephones that we can push here in the next couple of weeks, I hope.
Yeah, a couple more things. If we didn't get to your call today, please email us, tv@atheist-community.org,
Yep.
and we'll try to answer you. Let's see, what else? The ACA lecture series, our next lecture is Sunday, February 14th at the Austin History Center. on 9th in Guadalupe. That's going to be at 12:30 p.m.
Is that Ed?
That's Chris Robison. He's going to talk about the chemistry of love. See what we did there?
Valentine's Day,
Yeah.
chemistry of love.
So
We
all
should have
right.
like the love rings we used to have back before I was involved in the show.
Yeah.
It's a little graphic at the public access. We'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.